Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for How to Use Emotional Intelligence, EI, to Recruit Real Talent. Sponsored by MHS and presented by Rosalinda Batson. Before we begin, I'd like to remind you that this webcast has been pre-approved for HRCI credit and can also be used for SHRM credit. Please be sure to attend the complete webcast in order to receive your credits. After the webcast, you'll receive an email from HR.com within 1 to 2 business days. It will include your certification information. You can also log into HR.com and go to your View My Credits page where you can see the credits that you've already received. If you have any questions today for our presenter or for HR.com, please type them into your Questions tab on your GoToWebinar control panel, and we'll be sure to follow up with you. And it's my pleasure now to turn you over to Rosalinda Batson.
Thank you so much, Sylvie. I'm really excited to be here, and I'd like to welcome everyone to this webinar, no matter where they are in the world. We certainly are a global community. I really look forward to sharing my experiences with you and talking about emotional intelligence and recruitment. So let's get underway. I have put some extra information in there. I know that on HR.com it had my bio, but I always like to add in a little bit more just to give you a better sense of who I am rather than just my work credentials. So as I sort of state there, I do work in emotional intelligence, positive psychology, and I'm both a distributor and trainer of the EQI tool and the Pearman. I've got some amazing clients, who are real experts in their fields, and it's such a pleasure to be able to work with like-minded people. I do love learning. I am always on the lookout for new approaches. I'm currently reading a great book called Radical Candor by Kim Scott that's really sort of cementing some things that I already were thinking and feeling around leadership and leadership styles. As I mentioned there, my other passion is running, and I'm sure there are some other runners out there in our HR community. I am contemplating a half Ironman. I think it might be a little while away, but after having done a few marathons, it's kind of like, well, what's next? But, I just find that running is a great way to get a bit of mindfulness into your life and to sort of calm everything down and to sort everything out. So I guess it's a little bit of emotional intelligence in its own way. So that's a little bit more about me rather than just my work credentials. So today we're talking about emotional intelligence in recruitment. So specifically, the objectives I am aiming for in this webinar is to enable you to understand why emotional intelligence is a key capability and critical for current recruitment practices. And I do say current practices because I do feel there's been a big shift in recruitment in terms of getting candidates and keeping good people. I also want you to get an overview of what emotional intelligence actually is. I mean, if we're going to talk about using it in recruitment, then you really need to understand what does that actually mean. So I just want to give you an overview of EI and also give you some insights into potential workplace behaviours that it provides. And then finally, I'm going to go through a couple of case study examples where I demonstrate how my organisation, Neural Networks Consulting, how we have actually used EQI to great success in recruitment with some of our clients. So hundreds of millions of dollars are spent every year by organisations to help them hire the best workforce, to develop leaders, improve organisational performance. How's your investment working for you? I mean, that really is the question, isn't it? How is your investment working for you? I think we can always do better. But then I also think it's not just about the investment, it's also about what is your organisation culture? What is your workplace like? Are you getting the right people in the right roles? Are you being able to achieve your strategic objectives? So recruitment is just such a critical function for all organisations, no matter their size. Other than if you're a sole trader, we all have to recruit. And it can be a little bit nerve-wracking. I'm not sure if anybody else has had that experience where, you're going to recruit for a fairly critical position or even just any position in your organisation and you kind of think, oh, what if I get this wrong? And then you also think, well, what if I get this right? What if I get someone really fantastic? How am I going to make sure that I hold on to them? So maybe I'm alone, but I do feel that it can be quite a nervous activity, recruitment, because you really want to make sure that you get the right person and that you then provide the right environment for them. So I just wanted to do a little quick poll to get your views on what it is that you generally focus on when you're recruiting. What is sort of the key critical aspect? I'll put the poll up in a minute. What you can see there is, the options that are going to come up. I know that you may think, my answer's not there, or you may want to choose more than one. So just for the purposes of this webinar and for me, if you could just please choose the one that's the best fit, or if you had to sort of play them off against each other, which one would end up being the most important. So I'm just going to select the poll now and put that up onto the screen for you. And I'll give you a couple of minutes to answer this question. What is the most critical aspect you consider when recruiting for talent? Great, so I can see the numbers moving around. Geez, you're all pretty quick off the mark here. This is fantastic. I thought you may need to take a bit more time to think, but it's great that you're all really very clear. All right, I'll just give it a few more seconds. All right, we're almost there from the looks. All right, I'm going to close the poll in 5 seconds. I'll just count down. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, let's have a look at these results. There we go. Well, that's really interesting. So 17% of you are looking for experience. Only 10% are focused on technical expertise. Now, I would say that's a real sort of shift in the market. I think we all used to really look for, who's got the key technical skills that we really need for the role. But yeah, that's a real change, isn't it? Cultural fit at nearly 40%. I mean, that is really interesting. 22% for mindset. Obviously, some jobs it's more important than others. And 11% for potential. All right, I'm certainly going to come back to these points a bit later around those different categories, but really interesting that cultural fit seems to be so much more important or critical when recruiting. So I hope other people are finding that interesting as well. Yeah, and certainly there's going to, I believe that potential is going to increase. People are going to be looking for that a bit more often, I think, over time. All right, so let me get back to my slides. And thank you so much for everybody answering that question. All right, so I'm going to talk about some critical ingredients that I feel are important when recruiting. And they do cover off some of those points in the poll. So I always think it's important to understand, and this really does fit with your responses, which words really reflect your culture. What is the culture of your organisation? And just being able to articulate that and understand it really helps when you start to think about recruiting for your organisation. So we also need to consider not just what is our culture right now, but potentially what are we working towards. What do we need our culture to be? Because there could be shifts in the marketplace that we're having to come to terms with, which means that our organisation culture has to change. And we need to be mindful of that when we're recruiting. What sort of person best fits where you are or where you want to be? Who are they? Who do they need to be? What kind of almost, in some ways, that you kind of get a sense of their personality, like who are they, and then how will they behave. Something that not many people consider, but I've started to feel is much more important, particularly when you are recruiting for cultural fit or mindset or potential. Will the incoming candidate have a manager who can lead them, coach them, hold them accountable? Or is that manager going to treat them in a way that's going to just revert back to sort of behaviours that you're trying to avoid or trying to move on from? So, you know, have you got a manager in there who's going to be able to support that person right from the beginning? Also, what behaviours are we rewarding in the workplace? Sometimes I haven't always wanted to look at that. Sometimes I haven't wanted to face up to what behaviours might I actually be rewarding. But I think it's really important to understand your environment, and it fits really neatly in with that view of, well, what's our culture? How would I describe it? So then moving straight into what your behaviours are, it's all part of that same puzzle. And then the last sort of critical aspect, I feel, is that if someone was nailing this role, what would it look like? That is, if they were doing it really well, how would you know? What would you see them doing? I mean, and that basically is the job role, isn't it? So by considering this context, it helps you to make decisions about how to advertise, where to advertise, what attributes a successful candidate needs to have, and then what support they may need in order to nail the role. But you then defining what that looks like when they are nailing the role means that you then have a job description. All right, so let's talk about how a lot of organisations recruit at the moment. A lot of my clients are still utilising behavioural interviewing. We have found that moving towards experiential activities and techniques in interviews gives us a better outcome. Unfortunately, nowadays, we are at a bit of a disadvantage because candidates tend to prepare interview stories that highlight the different competencies and skill sets that they think the employer is going to be looking for. Another problem that I find with behavioural interviewing is that the questions are often asked in a way that gives away the correct answer and potentially ruins its effectiveness. So, as an example, tell me about a time when you successfully persuaded someone to see things your way. Well, it's already giving them the heads up as to what you're looking for as an outcome. You're looking for them to tell you a story about when they've persuaded someone to their way of thinking. Now, you can tweak the questions to something a little bit more like, could you tell me about a time when you were bored on the job? Because you're not really giving them the answer with that one. They are sort of a bit open. But still, we're seeking stories which may inadvertently could be fabricated or at least a little bit embellished. They certainly, I have found even through my own career and those of candidates who you meet, the more experienced that we all become, the more we sort of know what the right answer is. You know, we sort of have a sense of, well, I know I should say it like this. I know that my story, I should just sort of, you know, shift it a little bit so that it sounds a little bit more like what somebody would expect. So we find experiential activities based on the desired behaviours that you're looking for provides greater insight into what the candidates are actually capable of. So we are here to talk about emotional intelligence in recruiting. So I better start with, well, what is emotional intelligence? You know, really, what is it? It's a word that's thrown around quite regularly in my field of work, and I really like the definition that MHS assessments developed as part of the EQI 2.0 emotional intelligence assessment. That emotional intelligence is a set of emotional and social skills that influence the way we perceive and express ourselves, develop and maintain social relationships, cope with challenges, and use emotional information in an effective and meaningful way. I'll just let you sit with that for a little minute so you can digest it, because there is quite a few sort of components in there. So it's not just about your emotional state and managing it, it's also about your social skills. So how do you express yourself? How do you develop and maintain those relationships with others? How do you cope with challenges? And then using all the emotional information that is available to you in an effective and meaningful way. So that's not just about your own emotional information about how you may be feeling and responding, but also tapping into the emotional tone of situations to see how other people are responding. Two, I feel that there's an extra layer around there about just understanding human psychology, and so therefore being able to alter the way that you relate to other people in order to account for the way we like to be engaged. So I've got another poll for you. Another one, you say. Yes, I do. So with the poll, I just want to understand how many people who are on the line have actually utilised an EI assessment, either personally, like undertaken one to develop your own understanding, but then also, you know, have you used it as part of your experiences in the workplace? So I'm just going to pop that poll up. So be really good. I'm going to give you a few options there around which tools. So of course you can say, no, I've never used an EQ tool. Then I've got the options around sort of 3 key ones in the marketplace that you may have come across. But I know there's some others, so I've given you that other option at the bottom about potentially there's another one you may have used. Just gives me an idea too of how much detail I need to go into around emotional intelligence. So I'm just going to launch that poll now. Here we go. And I'll just give you a minute to make a choice. Great, everyone's really off the mark, which is fantastic. All right, we're getting there. So you're much quicker on this one, I have to say. So I'll just give it another few seconds to see. I think it's a much easier question, this one, isn't it? All right, I'll close that off in 5 seconds. I'll just count down. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, I'll close it now. Share the results with you. So 57% of you have not experienced an emotional intelligence assessment. Well, I tell you, that makes me feel a bit sad. And I hope you get the opportunity very soon, especially after this webinar. Hopefully my passion for emotional intelligence comes through and it inspires you to find a local practitioner who can administer an EI assessment for you. But look, 24% of you have used the EQI, like myself, and the GENOS, fantastic. That was an assessment that was created here in Australia, so there's obviously some other fellow Aussies on the line. And then 18% have used another EI assessment. I know that 6 seconds has become quite popular. I'm not sure of others that are out there, but that's really interesting. So we're looking at about half of you that have, just less than half who have experienced an emotional intelligence assessment, and over half that have not yet had that pleasure. That's great. So that really gives me a good idea as to how much detail to go into around EQI. So I'll just hide those results and we can move back to the presentation. Great, so I'm going to be talking about the EQI 2.0 model of emotional intelligence because that is the tool that I am most familiar with. And as mentioned in my bio, I am both a distributor and trainer of the tool. So I run emotional intelligence certification programs as well as distribute it within Australia. You can see from the wheel that it has 5 composite scales. So that's the self-perception, self-expression, interpersonal, decision-making and stress management. Within those, they have 3 subscales. So all up, the EQI 2.0 model shows us that there's 15 subscales that make up our emotional intelligence. You can see also around the outside the grey circle that says emotional and social functioning. So that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about emotional and social functioning. And there's also a link to well-being. So the higher your emotional intelligence, the higher your well-being. So there's a correlation there between those. So that's a real added benefit, I guess, of working on and improving your emotional intelligence, you are also likely to improve your well-being. So I'm going to describe this wheel. Now, based on the fact that over half of you have not experienced an emotional intelligence assessment, I'm going to go through this in a fair amount of detail. So for those of you that are familiar with the EQI tool, this will be a lovely little refresher. And perhaps you can think about how your profile may have changed since you undertook the assessment, whether there may be some subscales that you may have been focused on in terms of development. And for those of you that have done a different assessment, it's a lovely opportunity to see, well, what are the differences in the tools in the workplace? So we start at the top with self-perception. And self-regard in there is really about your level of confidence. It's about accepting who you are, being comfortable with your strengths and weaknesses, and generally sort of feeling confident. We also have self-actualization. And self-actualization is your sense of drive, your purpose, your meaning, whether you feel like you're making good use of your capabilities. And emotional self-awareness is in there. And this is one that I think we often kind of think about when we think about emotional intelligence. So this is the ability to recognize your emotional state, understand your emotions, know what your hot buttons are, and be able to be cognizant of when you're reacting to a situation, both in terms of when you're getting excited or when you're getting frustrated, both the positive and the negative emotions, and then also being able to manage your emotional state. We then move around the wheel to self-expression. In here we have emotional expression. So that's your ability to express your emotions, both verbally and non-verbally, to talk about how you feel, your opinions, your thoughts. Assertiveness is also under self-expression. So this is putting forward your views in a constructive manner. It's standing up for what you believe in, saying no when you need to, being firm and direct when necessary. And if you disagree with someone, being able to tell them, but as I said, in a constructive manner. Independence is also in there, and this is your level of self-reliance. Do you prefer collaborative decision-making, or are you comfortable making decisions on your own? Do you like feedback on your performance? Do you prefer to be a follower rather than a leader? Do you like a job where you're told what to do, or are you more likely to work autonomously and independently? We then move around into the interpersonal, and within there we have interpersonal relationships. So can you build those mutually satisfying relationships with other people? Empathy is also in there, so that's that ability to understand as well as respect other people's perspectives. And we have social responsibility. This is you within the broader community. Are you passionate about social issues? Do you act in an environmentally friendly way? Those kinds of things. You more broadly, contributing to community groups and those kinds of things. From the interpersonal, we move around into decision making. And this is where I always feel that the rubber really hits the road with emotional intelligence. And potentially this is part of the wheel where people are a little bit surprised. Emotional intelligence, decision making. Okay, didn't really know they were related. But it's really critical here because we're looking at the role of emotions in decision making. So with problem solving, there's some items in there around, I worry about a problem rather than try and solve it. I get frustrated and give up when trying to solve a problem. So, what are the emotions that are involved when you are looking to come up with solutions? Reality testing is a really interesting one. This is about your objectivity. Do you see situations as they really are, or can your emotional state sort of cloud your judgment? Also, are you able to account for your biases? Do you have that ability to say, right, well, I really view the world through a particular lens, and you're able to put that aside in order to be more objective in your decision making? Are you able to sort of pick up on the emotional tone of situations rather than getting caught up in the drama? So I really enjoy reality testing to talk that through with people. It's just a very interesting perspective. Impulse control would have to be my absolute favourite subscale, if that's possible to have a favourite subscale. I do have a favourite subscale. Impulse control is the ability to be constrained or show self-restraint I particularly like people who are low on impulse control because, you know, they wear their heart on their sleeve, they say what they think, it's, you know, it's out there, and they're a bit more sort of spontaneous. But we all know you really do need impulse control because you need to be able to be diplomatic. You need to be able to take a breath, step back, have a look, think before you speak. So yeah, impulse control is a really interesting and important part of your emotional intelligence. And then finally, we move around into stress management. And within stress management, we have flexibility. Flexibility has two sides from my perspective: the ability to cope with change and be comfortable with last-minute changes, but it's also got the piece around being able to change your mind, being able to negotiate, being able to change your opinion when different information or different experiences are presented to you. So that's your flexibility. Stress tolerance is what you expect it to be. That's about whether you perform well under pressure, can you stay calm in difficult situations, can you think clearly when things are really stressful. So that's your stress tolerance. And then we finish off with optimism. So that's your glass half full. You know, do you have a positive outlook? Do you think things are going to turn out all right despite setbacks? So that's the 15 subscales in the EQI model of emotional intelligence. You know, the different assessments in the marketplace have sort of slightly different views on what makes up emotional intelligence. I really like the EQI because there's 15, it's quite comprehensive. Also to the wheel, it shows you how they all build on each other. You know, you'll notice that there's an arrow between the main headings there. Sort of the circle really goes round and it does build on itself. So that's the EQI model, and now we will move through into discussing how it works in context. So I thought it was really important to talk about how it works in the workplace. And I wanted to tell you a little story. So I had the pleasure of working with an absolutely delightful man in an IT department. I know, hard to believe that I used to work in IT, but I did. Before I became an organisation development consultant, I had the pleasure of working in IT. So on this particular project, I was responsible for the change management. And the manager was delightful. He was extremely intelligent. He was really adept at the political game. Unfortunately, that was necessary. And he was the project sponsor for this change project that I'd been tasked with. So I often had to write the communications for him. So when we were at meetings, letting everyone know what was going on, I was giving him a script basically to work off, you know, dot points that I would need him to communicate. Now, as you would expect, I did come through HR into IT, and I was tasked with the change project because I did have that ability to write communications and really sort of think through, well, what does the message need to be? How do we need it delivered? However, he didn't follow my script. As you can imagine, he didn't follow my script. Now, that was fine, you know, to a certain extent, but he really focused on the facts of the situation. And he felt that if you knew the facts, then the truth was evident and you would accept what needed to be done. What's the required action? It's inherent in the data. So if I just tell you these facts, then you're going to be okay. Now, we all know that's not really how it works. He was constantly surprised when people were unhappy with what he'd said. They questioned his underlying motives and they acted in ways that did not actually align with the facts and figures. He was missing a key ingredient. And that key ingredient was how to engage people, how to gain buy-in to decisions, you know, how to actually pay attention to how they were reacting and how they were feeling, and changing your communication to suit the needs of the audience. So I coached him on his communication techniques. I discussed with him how we make decisions emotionally and then we justify them with logic. And so that is why I'd been drafting my communication to, you know, tip the hat to what emotions were involved in the situation and then provide the facts to back up the decisions that we were making. You know, we discussed how the audience might react to certain messages that we were delivering. So thinking through, okay, they may respond in sort of different ways, and how would we then respond to those different responses? We talked about what information or emotions they may be looking for from him. You know, they may need him to be a little bit more vulnerable, to be a bit more open about how the experience was impacting on him, and building those into the message that he was delivering. Looking back through my EQ lens that I now have, he learnt emotional expression. He learnt how to balance assertiveness and empathy. He developed his emotional self-awareness and was able then to balance that with reality testing. So emotional intelligence is really the how you do your job rather than the what you do. And it can make a huge difference to the performance and culture of an organisation. I guess you're all thinking about, well, which EI subscales would be important for a change sponsor based on that. And I think some of the ones that I mentioned that I helped my manager develop are really key. And once you start to think, okay, I'm hiring someone who's going to be in a really heavy change role, you can start to see how emotional intelligence would be really useful in your recruitment, because you are going to be looking for somebody who has got that balance between assertiveness and empathy, somebody who's got reality testing along with emotional self-awareness, so they really can read a room and read themselves and be able to tailor their communication message. So that's just one example. I just wanted to be able to put it into a context and give you that story so that you can see how it plays out. And then hopefully you can start thinking about, well, how does it play out in my organisation? How does it play out in my role? And dare I suggest perhaps even personally think about, what are my behaviours exhibiting and what emotional intelligence am I demonstrating or not demonstrating? So I just thought I'd remind you why I feel it's important to recruit for emotional intelligence. I mean, obviously, EQ has been proven to be a greater predictor of success in the workplace than IQ. There's many studies that show that, and we've had that information around for a long time. Also, too, it impacts on organisation culture. So just reflecting back on the IT manager, just by him changing his style, he was changing the culture of his work environment, of his team. It really sort of shifted once he became a little bit more vulnerable, a little bit more understanding of other people's reactions. Then that really shifted the relationships and the feeling within that team. It can improve employee engagement. You know, people do feel much more engaged if they have got that relationship with their manager that is much more sort of open and able to express themselves. It increases leadership effectiveness. That's easy to see, I guess, even from my previous example. You can see that it would improve potential. It also provides a platform for amazing customer experience. People with high emotional intelligence really are able to build those mutually satisfying relationships with others, which I feel really underpins the move towards authenticity in both customer experience and also leadership, saying that. It underpins the ability to enact diversity and inclusion policies. People with higher emotional intelligence do tend to be more compassionate, more sort of understanding. You know, they've got that really great balance with empathy. They've also got that emotional self-awareness. So, you know, if they're uncomfortable with somebody's who's quite different to them, they know then how to manage themselves in that situation. So there does tend to be that underlying compassion and that ability to accept diversity and inclusion. Emotional intelligence is the glue that enables cross-team collaborations and sort of eliminates non-silo thinking. Also too, what's really beautiful about emotional intelligence is it's not fixed. It can be improved. No matter how old you are, you can certainly teach an old dog new tricks. You can build your emotional intelligence. You can focus on any of your subscales, and while you're developing one, you're probably developing another. We can definitely develop our emotional intelligence. So the research. Let me back up some of my beliefs and experiences with research. So the respected Centre for Creative Leadership in the United States found that the primary causes of executive derailment involve deficiencies in emotional competence. So each year, the Centre for Creative Leadership serves more than 20,000 individuals and 2,000 organisations including more than 80 of the Fortune 100 companies. So it says that the three main reasons for failure in relation to leadership are difficulty in handling change, inability to work well in a team, and poor interpersonal relationships. So obviously they are aspects of emotional intelligence. There's a great study that was done by Bratton in 2011, and it's one of my favourites. Dr. Stephen Stein discusses it in his book, The EQ Leader. They were looking into transformational leadership. Now, transformational leadership is seen to be quite desirable nowadays, and it is defined as having individualised consideration, so genuine concern for other people, providing intellectual stimulation, so being able to challenge people. Also, inspirational motivation, so being able to tap into people's intrinsic drive and being able to motivate them through those drives. If you want to understand more about intrinsic drive, there's a great book by Dan Pink called Drive, surprise, surprise, and that provides you with information around intrinsic drives if that's something you'd like to know more of. And also transformational leadership, idealised influence. So transformational leaders are seen to be people who serve as role models. So I'll just go through that again. So a transformational leader is seen to be someone who has genuine concern, challenges people, is able to tap into intrinsic drive, and serves as a role model. So a group of leaders and their subordinates were asked to rate that leader on their level of transformational leadership and also their level of emotional intelligence. Now, I've abbreviated transformational leadership into TL, which some of you might find disconcerting because I know that I have been finding it disconcerting because that always makes me think of team leader. But no, we're thinking of transformational leadership here. So they fit into 4 buckets, these group of leaders that were assessed by themselves and their subordinates. So 31 of them, in 31 cases, the leader and the subordinate both agreed that the leader was a good leader. In 23 cases, the leader and the subordinate both agreed that the leader was actually a poor leader, potentially someone who's on the way up or needing to develop their leadership skills. In 48 of cases, the leader self-rated lower than their subordinates. So they underestimated. They said that their transformational leadership style and their emotional intelligence was lower than what their subordinates did. And then finally, in 44 cases, the leaders self-rated themselves higher than what their subordinates did. They overestimated. So the key points in there really are that the leaders who underestimated their leadership capabilities actually were seen to have had the highest transformational leadership style and get greater emotional intelligence scores from their subordinates. So those who are humble, I guess. And the leaders who overestimated their leadership capabilities and rated themselves higher on emotional intelligence were actually seen to be lower in their performance by their subordinates. So that is that they overestimated and their subordinates did not feel the same way about them. So that's really interesting, isn't it? I mean, it just sort of suggests that, if you feel that you've got a great level of transformational leadership and emotional intelligence, that may not be the perception of others. And in another piece of research that was done, it was done a while ago, but it's still, I feel, quite relevant. So, I mean, 1999, for someone like me, it doesn't feel that long ago. Life goes in a bit of a flash, but really, that is 18 years ago. And it showed that after supervisors in a manufacturing plant received training in emotional competencies such as how to listen better, lost time accidents decreased by 50% and grievances went down from 15 to 3. I mean, that is a huge decrease. And then the plant itself exceeded productivity goals by $250,000. So, I mean, I think that's, that's really sort of striking. The same are principles just apply in all areas of life. So, whether at work or in relationships, we all really want to work with people who are easy to get along with, supportive, likable, and can be trusted. We want to be beside people that don't get upset easily, can keep their composure when things don't work out according to plan. You know, we really like those people who are emotionally self-aware and able to manage their emotional state. I think we do enjoy that certainty, that consistency. It's part of our sort of human psyche, if you like. So let's get to the nitty-gritty of this webinar. How do you recruit for emotional intelligence? That's what you're all here for. I mean, it was necessary for me to provide you with the background, but let's really talk about how do you do it. So I'm really going to give you a bit of a Rolls-Royce version so that you can scale that back to what fits your organisation. So there's different levels of sort of detail or granularity in terms of what you can do in relation to preparing, but I do think preparation is the key when you're recruiting for emotional intelligence. So a role description is important. So do you have a competency framework, or do you have a role description for the position? Are you then able to, well, that enables you, I should say, to map the emotional intelligence competencies that underpin the role priorities or the capabilities. And I'll show you some of those in a moment. So actually then being able to say, okay, so if that is my role description, if that is my competency framework, if that's what I'm looking for, then what would be the emotional intelligence domains that I need to support that? It's also important to articulate the behaviours that you want to see. We're certainly moving away from job descriptions as such to more sort of dynamic role priority documents. So, that requires you understanding the behaviours you would like to see or the evidence in the workplace. Like I said really early on, if somebody was nailing the job, what would you see them doing? What would it look like? And it's important to think about the above-the-line behaviours, so those that you want to see, and good to think about, well, what are the below-the-line behaviours that I don't want? What would I be looking to avoid? So that gives you sort of the both parts there. What would you be looking for? What would you want to avoid in terms of the behaviours that they demonstrate in the marketplace? So here's an example, and it's just a handful. Obviously, there's more emotional intelligence domains that underpin customer experience than these ones. And I chose customer experience because I thought that it's, we all have customers generally. Most organisations have customers, whether they are suppliers, whether it's B2B or B2C. We all tend to have to interact with someone who's purchasing our product or our service. So reality testing, we've specified there for this particular project, put aside your personal biases and read the immediate situation to see things as they are rather than the way you wish or fear them to be. Flexibility. Adapt your approach in different circumstances by adjusting your emotions, thoughts and behaviours to the changing conditions. So even if you just think about those two in relation to customer experience, it is important for the individual to really sort of be able to put themselves aside, so to speak, to really listen into what the customer's telling them, particularly when you're with a customer who may be emotionally charged, a little bit upset or bothered. How do you make sure that you step aside to sort of see what's really going on for that person rather than reacting and focusing on that within yourself? And then having the flexibility to be able to adapt your approach rather than following a script in order to authentically connect with that other person and be able to address their concerns. And you can see how emotional self-awareness and reality testing really play in together there, about having that conscious awareness of how your emotions may impact your behaviour, how other people may perceive you, and your ability to perform, how those emotions may impact that ability to perform. Self-regard's important in customer experience. Somebody needs to have confidence, so they're not looking for approval from the customer. They're not looking to be liked by the customer, because they need that sort of level of confidence within themselves so that they can be resilient in those difficult situations and ensure that they are servicing the customer rather than looking to be liked. And finally, I've got in there self-actualization. So we find that with many job roles, having someone who's wanting to make the most of their talents and abilities, wanting to really have purpose and meaning, it gives them that intrinsic drive. It sort of reflects that intrinsic drive that is really useful to have in a candidate in the workplace. So we utilise the EQI 2.0, so obviously those emotional intelligence domains reflect the subscales that you saw that I've described to you, but certainly, you know, other assessments would have the same capability. So what does the EQI profile actually tell you about your candidate? So on the first point, we would consider whether the candidate has the required results in the different subscales. So we've mapped our job role against emotional intelligence domains, and so then we can see, is the candidate actually aligned with those desired emotional intelligence domains? Now, it's really important to keep in mind that you cannot use one assessment to determine whether someone's a good fit for the role. This information works in combination with other components in your recruitment process. You've got to be very careful. You can't use the EQI as a yes, no, you know, like a no-go situation. It is just one component in your recruitment process. You're likely to have a CV or resume to review. There's going to be interviews, there'll be role plays, experiential activities. You know, the EQI is just one piece in that broader puzzle. So the candidate, their EQ profile will let you know if their emotional intelligence is aligned with what you've mapped out you desire for the role. And then you can work out from their profile the likely workplace behaviours that an individual will demonstrate. So this information, actually looking at what potentially this person's going to demonstrate in the workplace based on their EQ profile, you can utilise that to develop questions for the interview, and also you can develop experiential activities that are going to test some of those EI domains that you're looking for. I also find it really helpful to pinpoint or target items for referee checks, keeping in mind that emotional intelligence is something that can be developed. So even if somebody's profile shows you that they don't have it yet, doesn't mean they won't have it. So it's not saying that you can't do it, it's just saying that you're not demonstrating it at the moment. So let's take a look at a profile, a good example of a profile, and I'll explain to you how I can read, and other people who are trained in the EQI 2.0 can read the profile to come up with likely workplace behaviour. So this is a good profile. You can see the 15 subscales down the left-hand side. On this report, we've actually got the numbers. 100 is the average. Everything above 100 is seen to be good functioning. Anything below 100 is less demonstrated. So they're not demonstrating those behaviours as often. So when we look at this example, we can see that it is a good profile, you know, above average emotional intelligence. But looking into those subscales, I mean, there's a lot there for you to read, so I'm going to go through it. It's all about relationships for this individual. The high flexibility with the high interpersonal relationship subscale suggests that they're going to adapt their approach or change their decisions based on what others think. And when decision making, they may potentially go with the groupthink or seek to consult fairly extensively. That's because that independence is lower than that interpersonal relationships. This is somebody who likes to collaborate, enjoys collaboration, won't necessarily want the lead role, you know, happier to sort of be within that group. Their emotional self-awareness is higher than their emotional expression. So this suggests that they're not always going to communicate how they're feeling. They may expect other people to know how they're feeling, or it can come through their body language. Now, I look at that impulse control result and think, they may well be showing how they really feel through their body language, and they may not always be appropriate in terms of how they're showing it. Also too, people whose emotional self-awareness is higher than their emotional expression, they may not always adequately explain the motivations behind their decisions. They may not always give the why. So overall, in this profile, they're currently sort of struggling with communication. I mean, that should be fairly clear. You know, the self-expression composite as a whole is lower than other parts of their profile. I would investigate as to whether there's a reason for that. I'd want to ask questions as to how do they engage others, how do they express their needs, you know, how do they get buy-in from others for their decisions. Now that stress tolerance result sort of makes me suspect, together with that higher emotional self-awareness and lower emotional expression and assertiveness, that they could be overanalyzing situations in their mind which is creating that lower stress tolerance results. Also, potentially, this is someone who could be working autonomously at the moment when they really prefer collaboration, and that potentially could create stress for them. I'd be interested to investigate how that lower impulse control works in collaboration with that stress tolerance result. So are they showing their stress levels elsewhere, such as in their body language or making statements at inappropriate times? You know, what really is going on for this individual? Because there are some real strengths in this profile. You know, they are confident, they're quite driven, they've got that great emotional self-awareness, they're really people-oriented. So it seems to me that there's something going on in their current situation, or it may be that they've never really sort of developed their communication skills. So I'd be interested to know what's going on for them there. So you can see how you can then see the likely workplace behaviour of this individual based on their EQ profile. It gives you questions, it gives you things to ask them. I'll just let you Sylvie has put a message up there for everybody. Please feel free to download a PDF of these slides from the handout section of the GoToWebinar control panel. Yeah, certainly that may be useful for you so that you can look at this a bit later and digest that information, because there's quite a bit there. So with the profile, sorry, I'm just moving through my animation, we can also use the EQI to, sorry, as I go through, use this information interview, but you know, how do you use it? So based on analysis of the results, you can ask specific questions of the candidate regarding their workplace behaviour as it relates to the role, but then also you can look at their emotional self-awareness, their self-actualisation and their flexibility, because that will give you an idea as to whether they'll be able to adapt their behaviour or are prepared to develop. You know, it gives you a really good sense of, okay, is this somebody who can sort of focus on building their emotional intelligence? And obviously we see with this profile, absolutely, this is somebody who can develop. Great. Okay, so I need to quickly move on based on the time. So there's targeted questions you can ask of referees. As I mentioned, you know, the profile suggested that they would be like this. Did you find this to be true of them? You can debrief the profile with a successful candidate. So in light of your competency and behaviour mapping, it provides that provocation for a development plan to be put in place right at the outset from the day that they start in your role. And then you can also recognise, you know, we never get a candidate with 100%, so you can recognise the development needs and then how to support those development needs. So you've got the development plan, but then, well, what do you need around them? So let's talk about the case studies that I was really keen to present to you. We have done extensive work in the finance sector with a number of different organisations. For this particular client, it was a program that was focused on changing the way that they relate to their customers. And this was really one of those Rolls-Royce EQ and recruitment activities. So we mapped the EQI against role requirements. We assessed the shortlisted candidates against the EQI. We helped to develop an assessment centre which really focused on those experiential activities in order to test the desired EI competencies. All of the assessors in that assessment centre were certified in the emotional intelligence tool. So they were provided with additional training as well, specific to the process. And we taught them some sort of sophisticated human communication techniques around questioning. We then had them review the EQI profiles to develop targeted questions for the candidates. And on top of that, once the candidates had been selected and put into their roles, the induction program focused on developing emotional intelligence, also looked at conversational tools or tactics, and we used the EQ360 for internal applicants who were then put into leadership roles. So as I mentioned before, you know, you hire someone with your good cultural fit, who's got high emotional intelligence, but who are they reporting into? And so for this role, we made sure that they had the support that they needed to succeed and excel, because they had a coach who was emotionally intelligent as well. And the assessment centre that we developed, the experiential activities really focused on having the candidates demonstrate the emotional intelligence that we would want to see them demonstrate in the workplace. So you can see that this was a very long-tailed approach. You know, we had a lot of preparation up front, the implementation at recruitment phase, plus the action for embedding the emotional intelligence domains that we were looking for. So let me talk about the success that we had with this. So the successful candidates, they were engaged and adept at understanding the training that was focused on emotional intelligence. We gave them sophisticated communication techniques and emotional resilience, and they really picked it up very quickly in that induction training. They've hit the ground running in terms of the take-up of their role and desired behaviours, but we're waiting for the long-term data to be seen with relation to broader measures around the depth of customer relationships that they had. So the feedback from the trainers at the induction was really interesting because it indicated a much higher calibre consultant with impressive self-awareness and relational skills. The trainers were also certified in the EQI. The depth of conversations at induction and the questions that were asked by those candidates indicated a deeper understanding of the role and the behaviours that would be required of them than those trainers had ever seen before or even expected from this process. So the feedback has been exceptional about the calibre and the quality of those candidates because we did all that great work up front around mapping the EI domains to the role and then testing for those during the assessment centre and then making sure we backed it up with an induction program focused on EI and communication techniques and having coaches who were also emotionally intelligent. Another case study, which is based in state government, there was a restructure of a large department, as you can see there. So 200 plus executive positions were recruited for, initially internally, and then went to the market externally if they weren't filled. The recruitment process had to be transparent and it had to be consistent because it was state government. So 4 components to their process. The candidate had to submit a CV. They used another assessment called the OPQ, the Occupational Personality Questionnaire, as well as the EQI, but they used the leadership version. So we mapped both the OPQ and the EQI to a leadership competency framework. The interview panels were briefed on the likely workplace behaviour of each candidate prior to the interview. So they were given an overview of both the EQI and the OPQ before they went into interview with those candidates. The successful candidates were debriefed on both the OPQ and the EQI, including a development plan. Since then, there's been subsequent team building programs undertaken, and emotional intelligence has been embedded into the leadership development programs. I just want to quickly, I know I'm running out of time, go through the success of this project. We had, with the leadership report, you'll be able to download a sample from the MHS website. 79% of candidates, 10 or more of their subscales were in the range of a group of high-performing leaders that they were benchmarked against. 83% show a low risk of derailment, that is, they scored above average results on problem solving, stress tolerance, impulse control and independence. 86% exhibited above average social responsibility. Those high EQ scores anecdotally have correlated with high performance in the leadership capabilities as defined in the leadership competency framework. And utilising EQI has instigated widespread team culture work across the executive cohort. So there's been this emotional contagion that they're all sort of engaging in conversation and language around emotional intelligence. So if you'd like to put in your questions, I'd be really happy to answer anything quickly. And if I aren't able to answer them, I'll reach out to you via email. I'd be more than happy to do that, seeing as I've spent so long talking. So I see there that there's a question from Michelle Proctor. Do you have to be certified to use the EQI profile? The answer is yes, or you need to find somebody who is certified who can provide you with those services of administering and then analysing the results on your behalf. Thank you for that, Michelle. can we provide with some sample questions or a reference site to help us create our profile? Well, yes, the MHS assessments website does have sample reports. And I've been told there's only time for that one question, but yes, MHS assessments have got sample reports on their website for the EQI, or if you wanted to make contact with me, I also can send you some sample reports. Thanks, Sylvie, and thank you everyone for attending the webinar. I'm sorry that I didn't give you enough time for questions, but I am happy to answer any online and reply to you via email.
Thank you very much, Rosalinda Batson from Neural Networks Consulting, and for MHS as well for presenting this very informative webcast today. Lots of information there, very interesting. And just a few reminders for our attendees. If you'd like to view this webcast again, the archive recording and slides will be available for you for up to 7 days. All webcast credits are stored in your HR.com account. Watch for your HR.com email to arrive within 1 to 2 business days. It will contain your certification credit information. Your feedback is important to us. Please take a moment to fill out the exit survey that will appear on your screen once the webcast is ended. Also, if you'd like to ask another question, you think of it when the exit survey is up, then feel free to enter it there as well, and that will be passed on. This concludes our webcast today, and enjoy the rest of your day.